3 times in a single chapter, Jesus touches what no one was allowed to touch. I counted them once, and the count would not leave me alone. A leper, a bleeding woman, a corpse. Read on their own, they are 3 acts of compassion. Read in order, they are something else. Because in the world these people lived in, you did not touch any of the 3. Not the man with the skin disease, not the woman with the flow of blood, and least of all, the body of the dead. The law of Moses was exact about it. Skin disease, bodily discharge, and death, the 3 great sources of ritual impurity. Touch one of them, and the uncleanness passed into you, always into you. The flow had a direction, and the direction never reversed. Stop there. Hold that word. Direction. The leper is healed in chapter 1. The woman in chapter 5. The dead girl, minutes later, in the same chapter. The man who recorded these scenes was not careless. He was a man who arranged his evidence. Notice the order in which Mark sets down the facts. He does not scatter these scenes. He stacks them. The 3 sources the Torah named, touched one after another by the same pair of hands. Keep your eye on the direction. It is the one thing nobody watches. The common reading says a frightened woman stole a quiet miracle from the edge of his robe. The text resists that reading. What follows is not a story about a hem. It is a case about a direction. And the verdict is hiding in plain sight, in an order of 3 touches that no careful reader should call an accident. Linen, blood, and a dead child's hand. Watch where the uncleanness goes. To understand what Mark did, you first have to understand the law he is challenging. And that law lives in a book almost no one reads to the end. Leviticus. Open Leviticus chapter 15. It is a chapter most people skip. It speaks of bodily flows, of beds, of chairs, of clothing that must be washed. It looks like dry legislation. It is not. It is a map of boundaries. It says who could come near and who had to stay outside. And in verse 25, the law turns to one particular woman. And if a woman have an issue of her blood many days out of the time of her separation, all the days of the issue of her uncleanness shall be as the days of her separation. She shall be unclean. Notice what the text does next. It does not stop at the woman. It spreads out from her. Everything she lay on was unclean. Everything she sat on was unclean. And whoever touched those things had to wash his clothes, bathe in water, and remained unclean until evening. Her impurity was not her problem alone. It was the problem of everyone who came within her reach. Think about what that means, day after day, for 12 years. She could not enter the temple. She could not share a meal without defiling the house. She could not sit where others would later sit. She most likely could not be married, and if she was, she could not touch her husband. Every chair was an accusation, every touch a contagion. The law had locked her out. And here is the thing the common reading never says out loud. Impurity, in this system, moved in one direction only. When the clean touched the unclean, it was not the unclean who came away clean. It was the clean who came away defiled. Contamination always won. The healthy did not cure the sick by touch. The sick dragged the healthy down. In Greek and in Hebrew, the logic is the same. Impurity is active. Purity is fragile. One is transmitted. The other is lost. It was so with skin disease. It was so with death. And it was so with this woman. So when she decides to press into a crowd, she is not committing a simple social boldness. She is breaking the law. Every person she brushes against, she defiles. And she knows it. 12 years had taught her exactly what her body did to anyone who touched her. Hold on to that, because you will need it within a few minutes. In this world, the rule has no exceptions. The flow runs from the unclean to the clean. Never the other way. Never. That was the word I held when I went back to chapter 5. Because what Mark records next should not have been possible. Go back to chapter 1. Before the woman, before the girl, There is a leper. Mark records him early, near the start of the ministry. A man with leprosy kneels before Jesus and says, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." And here the text does something that should have stopped any first-century Jewish reader cold. And Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him, and saith unto him, "I will, be thou clean." Put forth his hand and touched him. He did not need to. Mark will show later that Jesus heals at a distance, by word alone. He could have said, "Be clean," from 3 paces away, and the man would have been just as clean. But the text is deliberate. First the hand, then the touch, only then the word. By the law, that touch had just made Jesus unclean. The leper was one of the 3 sources. The contamination should have run up Jesus' arm and shut the temple door behind him. That is not what happened. And immediately the leprosy departed from him, and he was cleansed. Notice the direction. The impurity did not enter Jesus. The cleansing came out of Jesus. For the first time in that closed system, the flow ran backwards, and no one in the crowd seems to have grasped what they had just seen. Hold the image of that outstretched hand. We will see it again. Now move ahead to chapter 5, and the woman. Her scene differs from the leper's in one decisive point. The leper asks from the front. The woman asks nothing. She comes from behind. In the middle of a crowd pressing Jesus on every side, she comes up behind him, low, hidden, and reaches for the edge of his clothing. For she said, "If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole." Stop on that sentence, because it is the heart of the common reading. Most people hear a timid, superstitious woman here, trying to steal a magic cure from a piece of cloth, afraid of being seen. Healed almost by accident. Healed because she slipped through. The text does not say that. The text says she calculated. "If I may touch but his clothes." That is the sentence of someone who thought, weighed the risk, and decided. She knows she is forbidden to be there. She knows that everyone she touches, she defiles. She knows that touching a teacher is the worst of all, and she goes anyway. That is not timidity. That is desperation making a decision that, under the law, was close to suicide. And look again at the direction. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. By the law, she had just defiled Jesus. 12 years of impurity passed through a single touch. That was the one-way street. But the instant her hand meets the cloth, the fountain of blood dries up. Her impurity does not rise into Jesus. The life of Jesus comes down into her. 2 touches, 2 sources of impurity, the same reversal, exactly the same. Once is a miracle. Twice, in the same gospel, set down by the same man, is the beginning of a pattern. And a pattern is a choice by the one who writes. But there is a detail in the woman's scene that tradition seized on and turned into nearly every sermon ever preached on this text: the hem of the garment. And this is where I have to be honest with you about what the text proves and what the text merely allows. There is a reading of this scene that is beautiful. It shows up in sermons, in books, in videos, and it has a problem almost no one mentions. The reading is this: when the woman touches the border of the garment, she is not touching just any cloth. She is touching the fringes. And here we have to go to the word. Matthew and Luke, telling the same scene, use a precise Greek word, kraspedon. It does not simply mean edge, it means the tassel, the ritual cord that hung from the 4 corners of a faithful Jew's cloak, the tzitzit. And the tzitzit are not decoration. They are a command. Open Numbers, chapter 15. God tells Israel to put fringes on the corners of their garments with a cord of blue, that ye may look upon it and remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them. The fringe was memory. Every time the eye saw it, the covenant was recalled. To touch a man's fringe was to touch the sign of his obedience to God. So far, the ground is firm. The Greek word is exactly that. The link to Numbers 15 is real. When this woman reaches out, she is not grabbing a rag, she is grabbing the sign of the covenant. And that, on its own, already says something about what she believed. Now comes the part the sermons love, and this is where I put on the brakes. There is a verse at the very end of the Old Testament, in Malachi chapter 4, that says, "Unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings." Healing in his wings. The Hebrew word for wing is kanaf, and kanaf carries a second sense. It also means the corner, the edge, the skirt of a garment. The same word. Wing and hem. So the popular reading closes the circle like this. The woman had read Malachi. She knew the healing was in the Messiah's wings. She understood that wings and hem were the same word, and she reached for exactly that place. It all fits. Prophecy fulfilled, hiding in plain sight. It is beautiful. I wish it were as clean as it sounds. But the investigator cannot stop where the story turns pretty. He has to turn the evidence over. I have read this connection many times, and I always wanted to believe the whole of it. But there are three things it hides, and once I saw them, I had to treat it as a possible clue, not as proof. Let me show you what the enthusiasm tends to skip. First, Mark, our text, does not use the word for the fringes. Mark says only hemation, garment. The ritual hem, the tzitzit, appears in Matthew and in Luke, not in the gospel we are following. The detail that holds up the entire reading is in the other two accounts, not in this one. Second, in Malachi, wing almost certainly means the rays of the rising sun, not the skirt of a robe. The prophet is painting a sunrise, the sun of righteousness climbing with beams of healing. To force a cloth hem in there is to read into the text what we want to take out of it. Third, and this is the most inconvenient. When the Jewish translators carried Malachi into Greek centuries before Christ, they chose for wing the word pteryx, a bird's wing. They did not choose kraspedon, the word for the fringes. If the link had been obvious to them, they would have left it there. They did not. The wordplay works in Hebrew and falls apart in Greek. So what is left standing? This is left. The woman touched the sign of the covenant, and that is real. The link to Malachi is a possible echo, beautiful, perhaps intended in Matthew's mind, but it is not the proof that carries the weight of the miracle. Anyone who presents it as fulfilled prophecy, full stop, is selling a certainty the text does not give. And notice what just happened. One Hebrew word, kanaf, turned over until every face of it showed wing and hem, snowbeam, and the skirt of a robe. That turning is the whole method, not a scholar's gift, a habit anyone can learn. I gathered it into a short guide, in audio and in PDF, called The Word Beneath the Words, for anyone who wants to open a verse and do exactly this. It is in the description. Now, back to the woman, and to the deeper reason I do not want this case to rest on the fringe at all. Because if the focus stays on the hem, the real clue is lost. The fringe reading keeps the eye on the cloth, on the object, on the point of contact. But the mystery of this chapter was never in what she touched. It was in what happened to the direction when she touched it. And that is where we go now. Go back to the woman, at the exact instant of the touch. And this time, do not look at her hand. Look at what Jesus does next. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, "Who touched my clothes?" Virtue had gone out of him. Stop on that word. In Greek it is dynamis, power, force, the same root that gives us dynamite. And notice the direction of the verb, had gone out of him, not into him. That was the point the law made impossible. In the system of Leviticus, when that woman touched, something had to enter Jesus. her impurity. 12 years of contamination, climbing up the cloth into his body. That was the one-way street. That was the rule with no exceptions. But the text says the opposite out loud. Nothing entered, something went out. The power moved from inside Jesus outward toward the woman. The current reversed. And Jesus feels the reversal happen in his own body, to the point of stopping an entire crowd to ask who had set it off. Now put the three together. The leper, in chapter 1, the touch should have defiled Jesus, and instead, the leprosy vanished. The woman, in chapter 5, the touch should have defiled Jesus, and instead, the fountain of blood dried up. And now, minutes after the woman, on the same page, comes the third. Word arrives that Jairus' daughter has died. Jesus enters the house, into the weeping, and does the thing no teacher would touch. He takes the hand of a corpse. And he took the damsel by the hand, and said unto her, Talitha cumi. To touch the dead was the gravest impurity of all, the highest of the three sources, and for the third time, the same reversal. Death does not rise through the hand of Jesus. Life comes down through the hand of Jesus into the girl. She gets up. She walks. Count carefully. Skin disease, flow of blood, death. The three great sources of ritual impurity the Torah named, one by one, with none missing. Mark did not choose three scenes at random. He chose exactly these three, and arranged them so that any reader who knew the law would feel the impossible repeat itself. Once is compassion. 3 times, covering precisely the 3 categories of the law, is an argument. It is a thesis written in scenes. Mark is saying without saying it, the rule has changed. There is someone here in whom the contagion runs the other way. His holiness is stronger than their impurity. And now, it is the holiness that is transmitted. The clue was there all along. Not in the hem, in the direction. This is where the case closes for me. For years I read 3 beautiful stories. What I had not counted were the categories. When I saw that they were exactly the 3 of the law, and not one more, I understood I was not reading scattered miracles. I was reading a man defending a thesis with chosen evidence. There is still one word left to turn, and it is the most important. The reversal explained what happened to the woman's body, but at the end of her scene, there is a term that explains what happened to her, and the translation hides it, splitting it in 2. And there is more. Before he lets her go, Jesus calls her something he calls no other woman in the entire gospel. Go back to the last thing Jesus says to the woman. In English, it reads like this. And he said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague. Made whole. And then again, be whole. It looks like 2 ordinary words for healing, but the original is sharper than the English lets on. Look at the Greek, and you find one verb doing the work. Sōzō. Sōzō means to save, and sōzō means to heal, and sōzō means to make whole. It is a single verb, and it carries all 3 senses at once, without separating them. It is the word the New Testament uses when it speaks of salvation in Christ. And it is exactly the same word the woman had used earlier, while she was still only approaching. If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. In her Greek, the word was not healed, it was saved. See what this does to the whole scene. The woman thought she was coming for a cure, a body repaired, the end of 12 years of blood. And she received that, yes, in the instant of the touch. But the text refuses to let her leave with only the body healed. Jesus stops the crowd, searches for her, draws her forward to tell the whole truth, in front of everyone, her, the woman who could not be seen. And only then does he speak the word, not, you are healed, you are saved. The healing happened at the cloth, the salvation happened at the encounter. The touch dried up her blood, the word made her whole. And there is the name. Before, thy faith hath made thee whole, there is a word that is easy to pass over, because it sounds merely tender. daughter. In Greek, thugater. Search all 4 Gospels. Every woman Jesus heals, teaches, defends, raises. Nowhere else, not one single time, does he address a woman as daughter. This is the only one. A woman with no name, no status, declared unclean for 12 years, cut off from family, from society, and from the temple, is the only woman to whom Jesus gives that name. And notice the exact moment he gives it. While Jesus says daughter to this woman, he is on his way to the house of Jairus for his daughter. There are on that street 2 daughters. Jairus, loved, named by a powerful father, 12 years old. And this one, no father in sight, no name, 12 years of slow dying in her body. The same 12 years. Mark sets them side by side on purpose, and to the one who had no father, Jesus gives himself as family. Before he saves the important man's daughter, he makes this woman a daughter. This was the last thing left to turn. The reversal of contagion showed the power. Sōzō shows the purpose. He did not come only to repair bodies, he came to reverse what separates and to call back the ones the law had shut out. The woman entered that crowd as a source of impurity everyone was bound to avoid. She left it healed, saved, and called daughter. I confess I read this scene for years with my eyes on her hand. What still holds me today is not the hand. It is the verb, sōzō. One word that refuses to separate the healed body from the saved person. It took me a long time to see it, but once I saw it, I could no longer read healed where the text says saved.